So in facilitation, there's lots of styles, but we're going to look at 3 possible right now. One we'll call neutrality, and this is a classic facilitation style. It's the facilitator as a neutral party, not giving any preference to either group, and is there and is skilled at what we will call the perfunctory technicalities of the dialogue. They're good at small group discussion. They will make sure that people are sharing time equitably, that they're not making personal or ad hominem attacks on one another, that they're following ground rules, that they're staying on topic, they're managing time, like I said, but it's neutral, okay? A neutral facilitation in this sort of dynamic actually is going to result in this. You're going to support this master narrative and, as a result, also support the narrative of participant A. Now, what's harmful about that is that will exclude or make very difficult the narrative of participant T. Participant T is already trying to share a narrative that may not be harmonious with this narrative. It may be oppositional or not consistent with this narrative. And now also there's your role. It's very difficult to share that narrative. It's just not going to sound true. See, being consistent or coherent with the master narrative means I have very little to prove in sharing my narrative. If I'm sharing a narrative that just makes sense, it's what everyone knows. Neutrality makes it either easier for participant A or harder for participant T. Our second choice of style in facilitation we'll call the advocate. And this was largely developed in the 1970s, both around feminist pedagogy, but also around ethnic studies and ethnic-specific curriculum. The facilitator as advocate is a very specific role where I'm going to use my positional authority, my positional power in the classroom to push back on this narrative. I'm going to use my role and my power over my students or the participants to push back on this. So in a feminist pedagogy sense, it would be pushing back on patriarchal or paternalistic pedagogy and assumptions about curriculum. In ethnic studies, it would be maybe using Eastern philosophy versus Western reason and rational thought. It might represent using non-English speaking writers and theorists in philosophy. But I'm going to use my role to introduce something that is counter this and pushes back on that, okay? Now this is perfectly reasonable and rational if what I'm trying to do is support the narrative of the target who's also trying to push back on this narrative. But what it also will create in this dynamic is, what happens to this person, this participant? Well, this participant still has disproportionate social power. So they could choose to minimize this and minimize me as a facilitator. They may not be able to push against my positional power in the classroom, but they could choose to tune me out. Because of course I have them for 3 to 6 hours in a week for class, but then the rest of their time they're spent in the rest of the world, right? So they can just say, oh, I know what I need to get an A in that classroom, but I'm not going to be affected one bit by what's actually going on here. The other thing is, this participant may feel like the deck is stacked against them. So nothing that I say is going to be appreciated by either of these parties. I'm not going to get a fair hearing. So why am I going to expose myself as different? I'll just be quiet. So this role has lots of negative possible consequences in this dynamic as well. But it does support this narrative. So what we offer and what we suggest in our program is multi-partial facilitation. And this builds on work that was really first pushed and advanced by Leah Wing and Janet Rifkin at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, mostly around conflict mediation and conflict resolution. But we, since probably 15 years ago in the program of intergroup relation, have adopted it for use in facilitation and intergroup dialogues. For us in our program, multi-partial facilitation means, yes, we are overtly and with great intention using our position to push back on the dominant narrative. And by pushback, we mean something very specific in intergroup dialogue. We are seeking to surface it. We're seeking to reveal it. We want it to be almost as visible a participant as these participants. So anytime we see evidence of the grand narrative or the dominant narrative, we try to point it out and expose it and its influence in our room. But we're also equally committed, and sometimes in our practice more committed, to inviting and encouraging the participation of the agent, of participant A. Even as we support participant T's contribution by making it coherent and making it plausible, making it factual, giving it weight and centrality, we also say to participant A, your contribution is important to our dialogue. Your contribution matters. It's valid. I'm interested in it, okay? We're seeking this narrative from participant A. We're multi-partial in our approach as facilitators.